The wind blew with a force that seemed almost alive, slicing across the endless plains and rattling the small wooden cabin where Emma Thompson lived. The snow had started falling early that morning, soft and light at first, but now it came down in heavy, swirling sheets that made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Emma had lived on the frontier for several years, far from the nearest town or neighbor, and she was used to the harshness of winter. Still, there was something about today's blizzard that felt different. The wind was louder, sharper, and colder than she had ever remembered. She moved quickly inside her cabin, making sure the fire in the hearth was strong and that the animals were safe in their pens outside. Her dog, Rusty, a loyal and shaggy companion, barked nervously at the wind, his ears flat against his head. Emma gave him a reassuring pat on the head and muttered to herself, "It's just a storm, Rusty. We'll be fine." But even as she spoke, a gnawing worry tugged at her chest. The plains were unforgiving in winter, and one wrong step could be dangerous, even deadly. As she worked, securing the cabin and checking her supplies, a faint, strange sound reached her ears. At first, she thought it was the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls, but then she heard it again, a soft, pitiful cry, almost like the whimper of a small child. Emma froze, her hands tightening around the wooden broom she had been using to sweep snow from the doorstep. She listened carefully, heart pounding. The sound came again, clearer this time, and it made her blood run cold. Someone or something was out there in the storm, and they needed help. Emma didn't think twice. She grabbed her thickest coat, wrapped a heavy wool scarf around her neck, and pulled on her worn leather boots. Rusty immediately leapt up, as if he sensed that something important was about to happen. Emma opened the cabin door, and a wall of cold air hit her, biting at her face and hands. Snow stung her eyes, and the wind made it hard to keep her footing, but she moved carefully, guided by the faint sound of crying. The plains stretched out before her, a vast expanse of white that seemed to go on forever. Trees were few and far between, their branches heavy with snow, and the horizon was barely visible through the storm. Emma's eyes strained against the white blur, scanning for any sign of life. Then she saw it, a tiny figure huddled against a snowdrift, shaking violently. Her heart leapt. It was a baby. Emma's mind raced. How had a baby ended up out here, alone, in such a deadly storm? She didn't have time to think about that now. She rushed forward, calling softly, "It's okay. I'm here. Don't be afraid." The baby's crying grew louder, and Emma's heart ached as she reached down through the snow. The child was wrapped in only a thin, tattered blanket, barely enough to protect him from the freezing wind. His little face was red and streaked with tears, and his hands and feet were stiff and cold. Gently, Emma scooped the baby into her arms, holding him close to her chest to share her warmth. Rusty barked happily, circling them both as if to protect them. The wind seemed to roar even louder, pushing against Emma as she struggled to carry the fragile bundle back to the safety of her cabin. Each step was a battle against the snow and ice, and the baby's small body trembled in her arms. She whispered soothing words, hoping her voice would calm him as much as her warmth. Finally, after what felt like hours, though it had only been minutes, Emma reached the cabin door. She hurried inside, closing it tightly against the storm. The difference between the frozen wasteland outside and the warm, flickering light of the hearth inside was like night and day. Emma set the baby down on a thick blanket near the fire and immediately began to work. She removed the wet, frozen blanket, wrapping the child in dry furs and rubbing his tiny hands and feet to restore circulation. As she worked, Emma tried to learn more about the baby. His skin was smooth and dark, his hair thick and black, and though he was small and vulnerable, there was a spark in his eyes that seemed to fight against the cold and fear. She could tell he was not a settler child. Something about his features, his clothing, and the small carvings on the blanket suggested a different culture, a culture that had once roamed these plains freely. Emma felt a strange mix of awe and responsibility. Whoever this baby's family was, they had been separated from him, and now it was up to her to keep him safe. Hours passed as Emma tended to the child. She fed him warm milk from a bottle she had kept for emergencies, humming softly to soothe his cries. The storm outside continued to rage, and every gust of wind made the cabin shake. Emma wrapped the baby tightly, holding him close as she moved from room to room, making sure the fire stayed strong and the animals were secure. She thought about what might have happened to him if she hadn't been outside when she heard the cries. The thought made her shiver, even though she was covered in layers of warm clothing. Rusty stayed close, keeping a watchful eye on both Emma and the baby. Every now and then, the baby would look up at Emma with wide, curious eyes, as if sensing her kindness and determination. She smiled, despite her exhaustion. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I'll take care of you." The simplicity of her words carried a deep promise, one that she meant with every fiber of her being. As night fell, the storm showed no signs of letting up. Emma built a small nest for the baby near the hearth, surrounding him with blankets and furs to keep him warm through the freezing hours. She sat beside him, dozing only in short bursts, listening for every sound outside. The cries of the baby had grown quieter, replaced by occasional soft whimpers, and she felt a cautious sense of relief. For now, at least, he was safe. Even in the quiet moments, though, Emma's mind could not stop thinking about the dangers still out there. How had the baby ended up alone in such a deadly blizzard? Who were his people, and would they come looking for him? She knew the frontier was full of mystery and hardship, but she had never imagined being responsible for the life of a tiny child in such circumstances. Still, fear was tempered by resolve. She had found him, and she would not fail him. The night was long, and filled with the relentless sound of wind and snow against the cabin walls. Emma held the baby, feeling his small heartbeat against her chest, and thought about the fragile beauty of life on the plains. It was easy to forget, surrounded by the vastness of snow and the harshness of winter, that life could be so delicate and precious. But tonight, that truth was undeniable. One small act stepping into the storm had made all the difference between life and death. As she drifted into a light sleep, still holding the baby, Emma made a silent promise. Whoever this child's family was, whatever dangers the future might hold, she would protect him with everything she had. The blizzard raged outside, but inside the cabin, there was warmth, safety, and a quiet sense of hope. The plains were cruel, but compassion and courage, she realized, could shine even in the coldest storm. And in that moment, as the baby slept peacefully in her arms for the first time since the storm began, Emma felt that fragile, miraculous connection that only comes when one life is saved by another. The storm outside continued for days, relentless in its fury, but inside her small cabin, Emma Thompson worked tirelessly to care for the tiny Comanche baby she had found in the blizzard. She had named him Little Wolf, a name that seemed to fit him. Small, yet full of life and spirit. Each day brought new challenges, and each day Emma discovered how much strength she could find within herself when faced with the responsibility of another life. Emma quickly realized that taking care of an infant in such harsh conditions was far more difficult than she had imagined. Little Wolf was shivering constantly at first, and his tiny body seemed so fragile that even the slightest chill could have been dangerous. She wrapped him in layers of blankets and furs, carefully checking his hands and feet every few hours to make sure they were warm enough. She fed him from the small bottle of milk she had in her pantry, warming it gently by the fire and making sure he drank enough to stay strong. Each gulp he took made her sigh with relief, but she knew that even a small mistake could be dangerous. The baby was quiet at times, but often he would cry suddenly, and Emma would feel a sharp pang of worry. She would scoop him up, rock him gently in her arms, and whisper comforting words that seemed to soothe him. "It's okay, Little Wolf. You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you," she would say. her voice low and steady. She found that talking to him, singing softly, or even humming a tune seemed to calm his tiny frame. Each day, their bond grew stronger, built on trust, warmth, and the gentle rhythm of care. Emma had always been self-reliant, used to living alone on the plains, but caring for a baby brought a whole new kind of responsibility. She realized that every small task, feeding, keeping warm, making sure he stayed dry, was crucial. The storm made it impossible to leave the cabin, and she could not rely on anyone else for help. The nearest neighbors were miles away, and the roads were blocked with snow. She was alone, save for Rusty, who stayed loyally at her side, his eyes alert for any danger, and for little Wolf, who depended on her completely. Each morning, Emma would wake before sunrise, check the fire, and prepare a warm meal for herself and the baby. She would unwrap him from the layers of blankets she had placed around him for the night, and hold him close to her chest as she worked to stoke the fire. Little Wolf often cooed softly in response, or sometimes he would stretch and yawn, blinking sleepily at the light streaming through the small cabin windows. Emma found a quiet joy in these moments, a calm in the chaos of the storm that raged outside. Despite the harshness of winter, Emma also tried to create a sense of normalcy for little Wolf. She told him stories of the plains, of the animals that roamed freely, and of the changing seasons. She described the birds that would come in the spring, the flowers that would bloom, and the long summer days filled with sunlight. She spoke slowly and softly, imagining that he understood at least some of the words, and she smiled as she watched him respond with tiny movements or gentle noises. There were challenges, of course. One night, a particularly strong gust of wind shook the cabin, rattling the windows and sending snowflakes drifting through a small crack in the door. Little Wolf woke up crying, his tiny hands clutching at the blankets around him. Emma rushed to him, wrapped him tightly against her, and whispered soothing words. "It's just the wind, my little one. Nothing can hurt you here. I'm right here." She stayed awake for hours, holding him close until his breathing evened out, and he fell back asleep. Emma also had to be careful with food and water. She made sure the baby stayed hydrated, heating water for his formula and ensuring it wasn't too hot or too cold. She rationed her supplies carefully, knowing that the blizzard could last for days longer and that she could not risk running out of food for herself or the baby. Each decision was weighed with care, and though the tasks were exhausting, she never wavered in her dedication. The relationship between Emma and little Wolf deepened with each passing day. She found herself learning to read his tiny expressions, noticing when he was hungry, tired, or simply in need of comfort. She laughed softly at his attempts to grasp her fingers, marveled at the way his eyes followed her across the room, and found comfort in his small, trusting presence. For Emma, who had lived alone for so long, this new connection was both challenging and profoundly moving. The storm outside raged on, but Emma created a small world of warmth and safety within her cabin. She built a little nest near the hearth, layering blankets and furs to protect little Wolf from the bitter cold. Rusty curled up nearby, always alert, while Emma moved around the cabin, preparing meals, tending the fire, and making sure the baby's needs were met. The hours were long and filled with care, but they were also filled with quiet moments of joy and connection that Emma had never experienced before. She also thought often about the baby's family. Who were they? Where were they? Were they searching desperately for him? These questions weighed on her mind constantly. She hoped they would come for him, but until then, she felt a deep responsibility to protect and care for him. Her imagination sometimes took her to visions of the baby's parents, struggling against the storm, searching for their child. Emma could only hope that her actions had given little Wolf the chance to survive until they could find him again. Even with the constant worry, Emma found small joys in the routine of caring for little Wolf. She sang songs to him, softly at first, and then, with growing confidence, watching as he would relax and eventually drift off to sleep. She read from books she had brought from the nearest town, hoping the sound of her voice would comfort him. She laughed quietly at his attempts to suck on his tiny fists, and marveled at the way he would look up at her, as if he already understood that she was there to protect him. Days passed slowly, each one blending into the next, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun through the frosted windows. Yet Emma never felt alone. Though the storm isolated her from the outside world, the presence of Little Wolf gave her purpose and filled her life with meaning she had never known before. She realized that even in the harshest conditions, compassion and courage could create warmth, safety, and connection. One evening, as she held Little Wolf by the fire, Emma noticed that he had stopped shivering as much and was beginning to gain strength. His tiny cheeks had a healthy glow, and he seemed more alert, turning his head toward her whenever she spoke. Emma felt a surge of relief and pride. Her care, her attention, and her determination had helped him survive the blizzard's worst days. She knew the danger was not yet over, but this small victory filled her heart with hope. Even as the storm showed signs of slowing, Emma remained cautious. She continued to monitor Little Wolf, ensuring he stayed warm, fed, and comfortable. She knew the plains could be unpredictable, and that even after the storm, challenges would remain. But for the first time since the blizzard began, she allowed herself to feel a quiet confidence. They had made it this far together, and she believed they could face whatever came next. Emma also thought about the lessons she had learned. Caring for Little Wolf had taught her patience, resilience, and the power of simple acts of kindness. It had reminded her that even in the most difficult circumstances, one person's courage could save a life. She reflected on the tiny hands in hers, the trust in his eyes, and the bond that had formed between them. It was a bond that would stay with her forever, no matter what the future held. By the end of the fourth day, the storm had lessened, and the snow had begun to fall more gently. Emma watched the world outside her windows, knowing that the harshest part of the blizzard had passed. She felt a sense of cautious optimism. Little Wolf was growing stronger, more alert, and more responsive with each passing hour. Her efforts had made a difference, and she knew that soon, their lives might change in ways she could not yet imagine. As she sat by the fire, holding Little Wolf close, Emma felt an overwhelming mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. Exhaustion from the long, relentless days of care, and gratitude for the opportunity to protect and nurture a life that had been so vulnerable in the storm. She whispered softly to him once more, "You're safe now, Little Wolf, and I'll always be here for you." The baby cooed in response, his small hand brushing against her cheek, as if acknowledging her promise. In those quiet moments, Emma realized that her life had changed forever. She had gone out into the blizzard expecting to face danger and isolation, but instead, she had found connection, responsibility, and a profound sense of purpose. Little Wolf had become more than a child in need. He had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of compassion to overcome even the harshest circumstances. The storm had finally begun to calm. The wind still howled occasionally across the plains, but it no longer carried the same biting force that had made the past days so dangerous. Snow blanketed the land in thick, sparkling layers, reflecting the pale sunlight that struggled through the clouds. Inside her cabin, Emma Thompson watched Little Wolf sleep peacefully in his nest of blankets and furs, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small sigh of relief. They had survived the blizzard together, and it seemed as though the worst was over. But as she busied herself with routine chores, checking the fire, preparing a small meal, and tidying the cabin, Emma could not shake the feeling that someone might be approaching. Perhaps it was a lingering worry from the past days, the kind that stayed with a person after facing life and death situations. Or perhaps it was the emptiness of the plains that made every sound, every shadow, feel larger than it was. Rusty, her loyal dog, had picked up on her unease and paced near the door, his ears twitching and his tail stiff. Then Emma heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats crunching over the snow. At first, she thought she might be imagining it. The plains were vast, and it was rare for anyone to travel this far in the middle of winter, especially after a blizzard. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, and she realized with a shock that it was not a lone rider, but a group moving together, horses, many of them, and with them, people. Emma's heart began to race. She had no idea who they were, and fear and curiosity mingled in her chest. She quickly gathered little Wolf into her arms, holding him close to her chest. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked at her, small and trusting. "It's okay, little Wolf," she whispered. "Stay with me. We'll see who it is." She stepped to the window, careful to peek through the frosted glass. At first, the snow made it difficult to see, but soon she could make out figures riding toward her cabin. There were many of them, more than she could count at first glance, but she estimated at least 100 riders, their horses kicking up clouds of snow as they moved steadily across the plains. Fear and awe washed over her. Who were these people? Were they settlers? Bandits? Or something else entirely? Emma had spent years on the frontier and knew the dangers of traveling too far from her isolated home, but she had never imagined encountering such a large group in these conditions. She braced herself, standing near the door with little Wolf still in her arms, Rusty at her side, growling low in his throat. The riders drew closer, and Emma could see them more clearly. They were not settlers, and they were not strangers she had ever seen before. Their faces were painted with patterns of red, black, and white, and their clothing was made of leather and furs, practical for the harsh winter, but decorated in ways that suggested tradition and identity. They carried bows and spears, though none were raised threateningly. It was clear they were not here to attack indiscriminately. They were searching for something, or someone. Emma's mind raced. Could these people be connected to little Wolf? She had wondered about the baby's family since the moment she rescued him, and now it seemed she might finally have an answer. She held him close, whispering again, "It's okay, little Wolf. I think your family is here." She tried to steady her voice, though her heart was pounding so hard she feared the baby could feel it. The group stopped near the edge of the snow-covered clearing around her cabin. At first, no one dismounted. They seemed to be observing, communicating silently with gestures and quiet calls. Emma could see the leader among them, a tall man with a commanding presence. His face marked with red paint, and strong, thoughtful features. He scanned the cabin, then looked at Emma, as if measuring her intentions. Emma raised a hand slowly, showing she meant no harm. She hoped he could understand her peaceful intentions. Then, one by one, the riders dismounted, moving gracefully through the snow with a quiet authority. Their movements were precise, almost ceremonial, yet careful and respectful. They approached the cabin cautiously, eyes never leaving Emma and the baby. Emma's chest tightened with a mix of fear and hope. She had never been in such close contact with the Comanche people, though she had heard stories from other settlers. She remembered that they were known for their strength, courage, and loyalty to family and tribe, and she hoped that her actions in rescuing little Wolf would be understood. As the leader reached the cabin door, he paused, studying Emma and little Wolf. There was a moment of silence so heavy it felt as if time itself had stopped. Emma held her breath, waiting, unsure of what would come next. Then, slowly, he nodded, and a calm voice, spoken through an interpreter who had come forward, said, "You saved him." Emma blinked, her throat tight. The words confirmed what she had hoped. These people had come for the baby, and they knew of her courage. "Yes," Emma replied, her voice shaking slightly. "I found him in the snow. He was alone. I couldn't leave him out there." She tried to keep her fear in check, knowing that little Wolf was watching her, even if only with his small, trusting eyes. The leader stepped closer, extending his hand toward the baby. Emma hesitated for a moment, Then slowly, carefully, she handed Little Wolf over. The baby's tiny hands reached out instinctively, and the leader cradled him gently, as though he were made of the most delicate material in the world. Emma watched, amazed, as a deep sense of relief and gratitude passed between the baby and the man. The tension that had gripped her for days began to lift. She realized that Little Wolf was safe now, in the arms of his family and his people. The warriors around the cabin lowered their weapons, though their eyes remained watchful and alert. They spoke quietly among themselves, their voices carrying a rhythm that Emma could not understand but felt in her chest nonetheless. It was a language of respect, of honor, and of gratitude. One of the warriors stepped forward, presenting a small bundle of gifts as a token of appreciation. Emma accepted them humbly, touched by the gesture. It was not just about material things, it was about respect and acknowledgement of her courage and kindness. The leader, now holding Little Wolf close, looked at Emma with a mixture of admiration and warmth. "You risked your life for him," he said simply, and the words carried a weight that made Emma's eyes mist. "Your heart is strong. You protected him when no one else could. We will not forget this." She felt a deep sense of humility. She had done what any person with compassion would have done. Yet the recognition from his people filled her with a profound sense of connection and shared humanity. For several minutes, Emma and the leader spoke quietly, through the interpreter, about Little Wolf's journey and about her actions during the blizzard. She described how she had found him, how she cared for him, and how she had struggled against exhaustion and fear to keep him alive. The leader listened intently, nodding as he understood each word. Emma could see the gratitude in his eyes, not just for the baby's safety, but for her courage, her kindness, and her willingness to act when it mattered most. Eventually, the warriors prepared to leave, but not before offering Emma an invitation that surprised her. "If you ever wish to see Little Wolf again," the leader said, "or to visit our village, you are always welcome. You are part of our story now." Emma's heart swelled. She had acted out of instinct and compassion, yet her actions had created a bond that crossed cultures, a connection that would last a lifetime. As the group mounted their horses and began to ride away, Emma watched Little Wolf waving to her from the arms of his father. Rusty barked happily, as if celebrating the reunion. And Emma felt a mixture of sadness and joy. She had grown attached to the baby, and letting him go was not easy, but she knew that this was the right moment. Her role had been to protect him until his family could reach him, and now that had been fulfilled. The warriors disappeared into the snowy plains, their horses' hooves kicking up the remaining snow, leaving behind a sense of awe and wonder. Emma stood at the cabin door for a long time, breathing in the crisp air, feeling the enormity of what had just occurred. In just a few days, a tiny life had been saved, a blizzard had been endured, and a connection had been made that transcended language, culture, and distance. Emma returned inside the cabin, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. She cleaned up, made herself a warm cup of tea, and sat by the fire, reflecting on the events of the past days. The storm had tested her courage, her patience, and her endurance, but it had also revealed the strength of compassion, the power of human connection, and the profound impact that one person's actions can have on another's life. As she watched the flames flicker in the hearth, Emma knew that she would never forget Little Wolf or the Comanche warriors who had appeared at her door. The memory of their arrival, their gratitude, and the reunion with the baby would stay with her forever, a reminder of the extraordinary moments that can emerge even in the harshest and most unexpected circumstances. After the Comanche warriors had disappeared into the snowy horizon, Emma Thompson returned to her cabin with a mixture of relief and reflection. The world outside was calm now, the blizzard finally over, leaving behind a sparkling white landscape that seemed almost magical in its quiet beauty. Yet inside Emma, A storm of emotions still lingered: relief that little wolf was safe, sadness at saying goodbye, and wonder at the extraordinary events that had unfolded over the past days. She poured herself a cup of tea, letting the warmth seep into her chilled hands, and sat by the fire, thinking about everything that had happened. The experience had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. She had faced fear, exhaustion, and isolation, yet she had discovered an inner strength she did not know she possessed. Caring for little wolf had taught her patience, empathy, and the deep power of compassion. It had shown her that one small act of courage could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. The memory of the Comanche warriors' arrival, their respectful demeanor, and their gratitude stayed vividly in her mind. She realized that this was a story she would carry with her forever. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to its regular rhythm. The snow melted under the emerging sunlight, revealing the plains once more, wide and open. Emma continued her daily routines, tending to her cabin, preparing meals, and caring for her animals, but the events of the blizzard and the reunion with little wolf were never far from her thoughts. Occasionally, she would pause and look across the open fields, imagining the Comanche warriors riding in the distance, bringing little wolf safely back to his family. News of the blizzard and the miraculous rescue spread quietly among nearby settlements. People spoke in hushed tones about the woman who had ventured out into the storm and saved a baby who would have otherwise been lost. Emma received visits from neighbors and travelers, not only out of curiosity but also to express admiration and gratitude. They brought supplies, shared stories, and asked questions about her experience. Though Emma was humble, she could not deny a quiet sense of pride. She had acted out of instinct and kindness, yet her actions had left a lasting impression on the community. Emma also found herself thinking often about little wolf's family. She wondered how the reunion had gone once they returned to their village. Did the baby recognize them immediately? How had the parents and elders responded to the return of their child? These questions filled her thoughts, and she felt a deep, lasting connection to the boy she had saved. Even though they were separated by distance and culture, a bond had been formed that time and miles could not erase. She knew that in some way, her life and little wolf's life would always be intertwined. Months passed, and the seasons began to change. Spring arrived, bringing with it the promise of new growth, warmer days, and longer sunlight. Emma found herself tending to her garden, planting seeds, and watching as tiny shoots emerged from the thawing earth. The beauty of the world's renewal mirrored the hope and joy that had come into her life through her experiences with little wolf. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a belief that her actions, though small in the grand scheme of things, could make a meaningful difference. Then, one afternoon, as Emma was gathering firewood near the edge of the plains, she saw a familiar sight in the distance. A group of riders approached, and her heart skipped a beat. It was the Comanche warriors, returning not for conflict, but to honor the bond that had been created during the blizzard. Leading them was the same tall man who had taken little wolf into his arms. This time, their presence was not urgent or tense, but calm and respectful. Emma felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she hurried to meet them. When they arrived at her cabin, the leader dismounted and approached Emma with a smile that radiated warmth and gratitude. In his hands, he held a small, intricately woven blanket, a gift for Emma in recognition of her courage and compassion. The gift was simple, yet it carried profound meaning, a symbol of respect, honor, and the enduring connection between them. Emma accepted it with tears in her eyes, feeling deeply moved. The warriors bowed slightly in acknowledgement, and Emma realized that this visit was not just about the past. It was about celebrating the bond of trust and humanity that had been formed. During their visit, Emma learned more about little wolf's family and the village he had returned to. The leader shared stories of the baby's parents and elders, their worry and relief, and how the village had celebrated the return of their child. Emma listened intently, her heart swelling with joy and pride. The knowledge that her actions had brought safety and happiness to a family and to an entire community gave her a sense of fulfillment that was almost indescribable. She had acted out of instinct, yet the consequences of her kindness had touched lives far beyond her own. The visit also gave Emma an opportunity to understand more about the Comanche people, their traditions, values, and ways of life. She learned about their connection to the land, their respect for nature, and the importance of family and community. Listening to their stories and observing their customs, Emma felt a deep respect for their culture. She realized that despite differences in language, background, and lifestyle, the core human values of love, courage, and compassion were shared by all. The experience broadened her perspective, opening her heart to a world she had only glimpsed before. As the day drew to a close, the warriors prepared to leave once more. Emma felt a pang of sadness at their departure, but also a sense of peace. She had witnessed the reunion, shared in their gratitude, and received a lasting symbol of respect. She knew that this moment, like so many in her life, would remain etched in her memory forever. Little Wolf was safe with his family, and she had played a crucial role in ensuring that safety. The knowledge filled her with quiet joy and satisfaction. In the weeks that followed, Emma continued her daily life with a renewed sense of purpose. She found herself helping neighbors more readily, offering support and guidance to those in need. Her courage and kindness had not only saved a life but had also inspired those around her. People came to her for advice, for comfort, and for the stories of the blizzard and the rescue. Emma shared her experiences openly, emphasizing the importance of compassion, bravery, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. As the years passed, Emma often thought about Little Wolf. She never forgot the tiny hands that had clung to hers, the eyes that had trusted her completely, or the family she had returned him to. Occasionally, she received letters from the Comanche village, sharing news of Little Wolf's growth, his laughter, and his adventures. Each letter was a reminder that the bond they had formed during the blizzard was enduring, a bridge between lives that might otherwise have remained separate. Emma also reflected on how the experience had changed her own life. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She had learned that compassion could create connections that transcended language, culture, and circumstance. And she had learned that one person's actions, no matter how small they might seem at the time, could have profound consequences for others. These lessons stayed with her, guiding her through challenges, joys, and the everyday moments of life. The story of Emma and Little Wolf eventually became part of local legend, shared among settlers and travelers as an example of bravery, kindness, and the power of human connection. People spoke of the woman who had faced a blizzard to save a child, and of the Comanche warriors who had arrived to honor her courage. The tale inspired others to act with compassion and bravery in their own lives, reminding everyone that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they followed their hearts. Emma herself never sought recognition. She had acted out of instinct, out of the simple desire to protect a vulnerable life. Yet the gratitude of Little Wolf's family, the respect of the Comanche warriors, and the admiration of her community were more than enough. She carried the memory of those days with quiet pride, a story of hope and humanity that reminded her, every time she thought of it, that even in the harshest conditions, kindness could shine like a bright, unwavering light. As she sat by her cabin window one evening, watching the sun set over the plains, Emma felt a deep sense of peace. The snow had melted, the storms had passed, and life had moved forward. But the memories of courage, compassion, and connection remained vivid. She thought of Little Wolf, of the warriors, and of the bond that had been created through a single act of bravery. She smiled softly, knowing that while the world could be harsh and unpredictable, the human heart had the power to endure, to protect, and to create lasting bonds that transcended time and distance. Emma Thompson had ventured into a blizzard expecting danger, Yet she found a story of hope, love, and humanity. She had rescued a child, earned the respect of an entire community, and discovered the profound impact of one person's courage. And in doing so, she had become a part of a story far greater than herself, a story that would live on, inspiring generations to come, reminding everyone that even in the coldest storms, the warmth of compassion could never be extinguished.